I'm going to look at exercise 6, and notice when I double clicked on that, because plot was the active window, it put it into that space. So if you want to keep the plot up, you always have to have, you know, sort of a plot window and a data file window. But the plots still exist, the data files are still there, so nothing's being lost. Lists. Lists are something that are relatively new. It's something that's relatively new to me. We didn't have these when I was doing consulting, but they're really nice because you're constantly working with all sorts of data within the model, external to the model. And what lists let us do is either generate data. So list create, essentially what this is telling us, and I mean, you can always look at the documentation to see what how it's defined, but essentially we're getting generate 10 values, or 10 items, all with a value of 5. And there's all sorts of these to do it. So you can have lists from 1 to 100, or lists to 1 to 100, but just every second value and things like that. If you have it, and so these are generated lists. If we have a set of data that we want to use, so this is our data, not something that's generated and sort of in sequence. We've got this command called, or this function called list.sequence. And all that's going to do is store this list of numbers into this global variable, fish variable called var4. Then once we have that, there's all sorts of these utilities that we can do, finding what the maximum value of that is. Sort these, I believe it's from minimum to max. So there's all sorts of tools that you can apply to the lists to further manipulate them. List.range is another kind of automated generator. So it's going to basically give us numbers from 0 to 100, adding 2.5 each time. So 2.5, 5, 7.5, etc. And then again, you can do all sorts of strings, numbers. This is the math intrinsic for pi. We can do a vector, all sorts of things. So let's look at this, just running the fish function called sumLists, just that little first bit. Get rid of the old data. Bringing up my fish global symbols. Again, we see we've got lots of lists and they've got content in them, but we don't know what that content is. So that's where, again, these things become helpful. If we just run fish list contents var1, and I bring that back up. So now I can see the first position is pi to some decimals. Then I've got my float, I've got the string, I've got these numbers, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at global var2, so let's see what that does. So let's go and run the second one, fish lists content var2. And when we do that, we get 2 values, 3.14 and pizza. So what does that mean? So you notice here we've got position 2, position 3. So essentially we're var2 equals var1, but just this value and this value. So again, kind of lots of different ways to manipulate and work with lists of data. Okay. So if we go here and we say var4, which if you recall, is this, sorry, it's probably, okay, var4 is just this list of numbers. So what we can do is essentially add 1 to all of those values. So if I run that, and then I list it, Now it's 3, 4, 5. Before it was 2, 3, 4. So really quickly, we don't have to loop through anything. We can just add 1, times it by 10. So just really quick things. And then this concept here will become more important as you work with lists and vectors. So if we display what the contents of our 8 are, run that selection, pop back over to the console. So that's a vectors 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and that's what we inputted into it. So that makes sense. But now we want to make var 8 the x component of var 8. So this is called an arrow operator, which is something I had never seen before getting into lists. It's sort of I think a higher order kind of scripting object, but it's quite helpful because if you've got x, y, z coordinates or x, y coordinates, you can just grab the x or the z or do something to it. In this case, what we're telling it to do is we're saying take the x coordinates in these vectors and multiply them by 5. And again, this is that truncation. Times equals is just take the value that's there and times it by 5. 2 more characters we could have written out longhand. But so let's do that. Okay, and now we have to list that again. So instead of 1 in the x positions, we have 5s. So just a little bit on lists and working with them when you start to work with sort of your own data. And it's kind of a helpful tool. Okay. And this slide just shows you a second to put it up on the screen. Okay, and this just gives you an idea of some of the things you can do with lists that are built in. We can sort them, we can sum them, we can reverse them, in max, count, things like that.